While every settler in the valley constructed standard peaked roofs with sharp gables designed to shed snow, Swedish immigrant Anders Lindqvist was bending green timber into strange curves that defied frontier logic. His neighbors called it circus architecture. They called him a madman wasting good lumber on a roof that looked like an overturned boat. Lindqvist had spent 3 weeks steaming and shaping wooden ribs into perfect arcs, creating a barrel vault structure that rose in a smooth semicircle from wall to wall. No ridge beam, no peak, no angles, just one continuous curve that his neighbors had never seen on any building in America. James Caldwell, the valley's most experienced carpenter, who had built 28 homes and barns across Montana Territory since 1869, rode past Lindqvist's construction site and stopped his horse in disbelief. "That roof will collapse under the first real snow load," Caldwell announced to the small crowd of curious onlookers. "Curved surfaces can't shed weight like a proper peak. Man's building himself a death trap." Robert Ashford, a wealthy rancher who owned 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, dismissed Lindqvist's design as Scandinavian foolishness. "They build grass huts in Sweden," Ashford joked at the saloon that evening. "Poor immigrant doesn't understand how we construct proper American buildings. That ridiculous round thing will be kindling by spring." Then came the catastrophic windstorm of March 1880, the most destructive weather event in Montana Territory's recorded history. Sustained winds of 90 miles per hour tore across the valley for 11 consecutive hours, followed by gusts that witnesses estimated exceeded 120 miles per hour. Peaked roofs exploded upward as wind caught under their eaves. Gabled structures twisted apart as lateral pressure exceeded what right angles could withstand. Caldwell's own home lost its entire roof in a single violent minute. Ashford's prize barn, the largest structure in the valley, collapsed into splinters that scattered across 3 neighboring properties. But Lindqvist's strange curved roof, the one neighbors had mocked as a ridiculous overturned boat, stood unchanged. Wind that destroyed 34 buildings flowed over its smooth surface like water over a river stone. Not a single shingle had lifted. The barrel vault that experts predicted would collapse under snow had proven invulnerable to wind forces that shattered every peaked roof in its path. What did this Swedish shipwright understand about aerodynamics and structural geometry that experienced American builders had completely missed? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. Anders Lindqvist stood knee-deep in wood shavings, his draw knife peeling long curls from a green pine timber he'd cut that morning. The wood needed to be fresh, still flexible with sap, capable of bending into curves that seasoned lumber would resist. Behind him, the steam box he'd constructed from old barrels hissed with moisture, softening another timber for the shaping process that had consumed his last 3 weeks. The October sun still carried warmth, but Lindqvist knew Montana winters from bitter experience. He'd arrived in the territory in 1874 and survived 5 winters that taught him the limitations of standard American construction. The peaked roofs everyone built shed snow adequately, but they fought the wind in ways that created dangerous vulnerabilities. Lindqvist had watched roofs tear away from buildings during spring storms, had seen supposedly solid structures twist themselves apart when gusts caught under sharp eaves. There had to be a better way. "Anders, I've come to talk some sense into you before you waste more good timber," called out James Caldwell, dismounting from his gray mare with the confident stride of a man who had built more structures than anyone else in the valley. Caldwell had learned carpentry from his father in Ohio, and refined his techniques through a decade of Montana construction. He considered himself the final authority on proper building methods in Gallatin Valley. Lindqvist looked up from his work, brushing wood shavings from his thick beard. The Swede was 44 years old, with hands calloused by 25 years of shipbuilding that had begun in the coastal town of Gothenburg when he was barely 19. His English carried the melodic rhythm of Scandinavia, though he'd spoken it fluently since arriving in America in 1871. "Your roof has no peak," Caldwell continued, gesturing at the curved ribs already rising from Lindqvist's cabin walls. "I've watched you steam and bend those timbers for weeks now, and I still can't understand what you're building. A roof needs angles to shed snow and rain. That curved thing will collect weight until it caves in on your family." Lindqvist set down his draw knife and walked to the partially completed structure. 6 wooden ribs already arched from wall to wall, their curves so precise that they seemed manufactured rather than hand-shaped. He'd used techniques learned building fishing boats in Sweden, where curved hulls had to withstand North Sea storms that would shatter flat surfaces. "In Gothenburg, we build boats that survive waves taller than this cabin," he replied calmly. "Curved hulls let water flow past. Flat surfaces fight the water and break. Wind is like water. It flows. A curved roof lets wind flow over. A peaked roof catches wind like a sail and tears away." The technical explanation challenged everything Caldwell had learned through decades of American construction practice. Peaked roofs were universal because they worked. The angle shed snow, the gables provided attic space, and the design had proven reliable across countless buildings in every climate. The idea that a curved surface could outperform established architecture seemed like immigrant naivety rather than sophisticated engineering. "Curved roofs belong on boats, not buildings," Caldwell insisted. "I've built 28 structures in this valley, and everyone has a peaked roof that's still standing. Your shipbuilding tricks don't apply to land construction. Different problems require different solutions." Lindqvist lifted one of the steamed timbers from his bending jig, demonstrating how the wood had taken a permanent curve after cooling in the shaped form. "Same problem," he explained, showing how the arc distributed force evenly along its entire length. "Wind pushes on roof. Peaked roof has 2 flat surfaces that catch wind like sails, plus edges where wind grabs and lifts. Curved roof has no flat surface to catch, no edge to grab. Wind flows over and keeps going." The aerodynamic principles Lindqvist described had been understood by Scandinavian builders for centuries. Viking longhouses had used curved roof structures that survived North Atlantic storms, which would have destroyed angular construction. The knowledge had been refined through generations of coastal building, where wind resistance meant survival, creating techniques that seemed foreign to American carpenters trained in continental European traditions that prioritized snow shedding over wind resistance. Lindqvist had witnessed the consequences of poor wind design during his first Montana winter in 1874. A spring storm had torn roofs from 3 cabins in his original settlement near Helena, killing a young mother when a collapsed beam struck her while she shielded her infant. The tragedy had haunted Lindqvist for years, driving him to apply the shipbuilding knowledge he'd brought from Sweden to the problem of wind-resistant construction. If curved hulls could survive North Sea storms, surely curved roofs could survive Montana wind. The steam-bending process Lindqvist used came directly from boat-building tradition. Fresh-cut timber was sealed in a wooden box filled with steam from boiling water, softening the wood fibers until they could bend without breaking. Each timber required approximately 1 hour of steaming per inch of thickness, followed by immediate placement in a shaping jig that held the curve while the wood cooled and dried. The process was time-consuming and labor-intensive, requiring skills that most frontier carpenters had never learned. Robert Ashford arrived later that afternoon on his prize stallion, curious to witness the Swedish immigrant's peculiar construction. Ashford owned the largest ranch in Gallatin Valley, his wealth built on cattle that grazed across 2,000 acres of prime Montana grassland. His success established him as the leading voice in valley affairs, a position he exercised through constant commentary on matters ranging from livestock to architecture. "Caldwell tells me you're building a roof like an overturned boat," Ashford called out, not bothering to dismount. His tone carried the condescension of a wealthy man addressing someone he considered fundamentally misguided. "I've seen some strange immigrant construction, but this beats anything in my experience. What happens when 3 feet of snow sits on that curve with nowhere to slide off?" Lindqvist continued fitting a curved rib into position, his movements precise and unhurried. "Snow slides off curves easier than peaks," he replied. "Peaked roof has valleys where snow collects. Curved roof has no valleys. Snow slides to edges and falls. In Sweden, we build this way for centuries. More snow there than Montana." Ashford laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the construction site. "Swedish snow must be different than Montana snow. Here we get wet spring snow that sticks to everything, followed by winds that turn buildings into kindling. Your circus tent roof might work in the old country, but Montana weather will teach you American building standards the hard way." The exchange attracted several other settlers who had paused their autumn preparations to witness the confrontation. William Hensley, a 36-year-old farmer whose property bordered Lindqvist's land, watched the construction with more curiosity than criticism. Hensley had noticed something the others missed: the mathematical precision of Lindqvist's curves, the careful spacing of structural ribs, and the systematic way the Swede tested each joint before moving to the next. Whatever Lindqvist was building, it wasn't the product of ignorance. "The ribs are spaced exactly 24 inches apart," Hensley mentioned to his wife Catherine that evening. "And every curve is identical, like he's working from some kind of pattern." The man spent 3 weeks just preparing timbers before he started assembly. That's not how someone builds who doesn't know what he's doing. By early November, Lindqvist's construction had progressed enough to reveal his complete design, and the site drew daily crowds of skeptical observers. The barrel vault roof rose in a perfect semicircle, 8 feet from wall to crown at its highest point, spanning the cabin's 18-foot width without any internal supports. The curved surface was sheathed in overlapping cedar shingles that followed the arc in continuous rows, creating a watertight skin with no valleys, no joints, and no flat surfaces where wind could find purchase. Most remarkably, Lindqvist had incorporated features that seemed excessive to American observers. Each curved rib was actually a laminated beam, 3 thinner boards glued and pegged together, creating flexibility that solid timber couldn't match. The sheathing boards ran perpendicular to the ribs, adding lateral strength that tied the entire roof into a unified shell, rather than a collection of individual components. Iron straps anchored the roof to the log walls at 4-foot intervals, connections far stronger than the wooden pegs standard construction used. "Man's overbuilding a roof that's already wrong," Caldwell observed during one of his daily visits. "Those iron straps cost more than wooden pegs, and laminated ribs take 3 times longer than solid timber. If you're going to build a foolish design, at least don't waste money making it complicated." But William Hensley had begun keeping detailed notes on Lindqvist's construction, recording techniques that seemed unlike anything he'd encountered in American building practice. Something about the Swedish immigrant's systematic approach suggested naval architecture rather than frontier carpentry, and Hensley wanted to understand the principles behind the unusual design. December brought the first serious test of the valley's construction methods. A 3-day blizzard deposited 4 feet of snow across Gallatin Valley, followed by temperatures that dropped to 25 below zero. The weight of accumulated snow stressed roofs throughout the region, and the results began separating adequate construction from superior engineering. James Caldwell discovered the first signs of stress in his own barn roof on December 15th. The peaked structure, built according to 10 years of Montana experience, showed visible sagging where snow had accumulated in the valleys between gables. The weight concentrated at specific points rather than distributing evenly, creating stress that Caldwell's standard construction hadn't anticipated. He spent 2 days shoveling snow from his roof, working in dangerous conditions to prevent the collapse that excessive accumulation would cause. Robert Ashford's prize barn required similar emergency intervention when snow load caused audible creaking from overstressed rafters. 3 ranch hands worked around the clock, clearing accumulation from the peaked roof, racing against continued snowfall that threatened to exceed the structure's load capacity. The valleys that channeled rain so effectively during summer had become collection points for snow weight that the design couldn't handle. Lindqvist's curved roof showed no signs of stress despite identical snow accumulation. The barrel vault shape prevented the formation of collection points, allowing snow to distribute evenly across the entire surface. More importantly, the curve's geometry naturally shed accumulation toward the edges, where it slid off without manual intervention. While his neighbors climbed onto roofs in dangerous conditions, Lindqvist watched snow slide from his cabin in gentle sheets that required no labor to manage. The snow falls off by itself, William Hensley reported after observing Lindqvist's cabin during the storm. Every few hours, you hear a whooshing sound, and a whole section slides down the curve and drops to the ground. His roof never collects more than a few inches because the shape won't let snow accumulate. Meanwhile, I've been shoveling my peaked roof twice a day to prevent collapse. The phenomenon demonstrated principles that Lindqvist's ancestors had discovered through centuries of Scandinavian construction. Curved surfaces distributed load evenly rather than concentrating stress at specific points. The continuous arc provided structural strength through geometry rather than material mass, allowing lighter construction to support heavier loads. And the lack of valleys eliminated the collection points that made peaked roofs vulnerable to snow accumulation. January and February brought additional snowstorms that reinforced the curved roof's advantages. Lindqvist's cabin required no snow removal throughout the entire winter, while every peaked roof in the valley demanded regular maintenance to prevent dangerous accumulation. The labor savings alone represented significant value, freeing time for other winter tasks that snow-clearing duties would have consumed. But the true test arrived in March 1880, when weather patterns created the most destructive windstorm in Montana Territory's recorded history. The storm began on March 14th, with steadily increasing winds that reached sustained speeds of 90 miles per hour by midnight. For 11 consecutive hours, the wind howled across Gallatin Valley with force that seemed impossible to survive. Then came the gusts, violent bursts that witnesses later estimated exceeded 120 miles per hour, tearing across the landscape with destructive energy that would reshape the region's understanding of proper construction. James Caldwell's home lost its roof at approximately 3:47 a.m. when a gust caught under the southern eave and lifted the entire peaked structure from the walls. The roof traveled 200 feet before disintegrating, scattering shingles, rafters, and sheathing across 3 neighboring properties. Caldwell and his family survived only because they'd retreated to the root cellar when the wind's violence made the main structure feel unsafe. Robert Ashford's prize barn, the largest building in the valley, collapsed at approximately 4:15 a.m. when sustained wind pressure exceeded what the gable design could withstand. The peaked roof acted as a sail, catching wind that twisted the entire structure until joints failed catastrophically. 2 horses died in the collapse, trapped beneath falling timbers before ranch hands could free them. The financial loss exceeded $3,000, representing 2 years of ranching profit destroyed in a single hour. Across Gallatin Valley, 34 buildings suffered significant wind damage during the 11-hour storm. 22 structures lost their roofs entirely, the peaked designs catching wind like sails until anchoring connections failed. 8 buildings collapsed completely when roof failure compromised structural integrity, and 4 more suffered damage severe enough to require complete reconstruction. The economic impact exceeded $28,000, devastating a frontier community operating on subsistence margins. Lindqvist's curved roof survived without damage. When dawn finally revealed the storm's destruction, neighbors gathered at the Swedish immigrant's property to witness what seemed impossible. The barrel vault structure stood exactly as Lindqvist had built it, every shingle in place, every iron strap still anchored to the walls below. Wind that had destroyed the largest barn in the valley had flowed over Lindqvist's smooth curve like water over a river stone, finding no edge to grab, no flat surface to push, no angle to exploit. "It's like the wind couldn't see it," William Hensley told the crowd assembled around Lindqvist's cabin. Every peaked roof in the valley caught the wind and tore apart. But the curved surface just let the wind go past. There's nothing for the storm to grab onto. The observation captured the fundamental aerodynamic principle that Swedish coastal builders had discovered centuries before scientific terminology existed to describe it. Peaked roofs created pressure differentials that generated lift, the same force that allows airplanes to fly. When wind struck a peaked roof's windward surface, it accelerated over the peak and created low pressure on the leeward side. This pressure differential pulled upward on the roof structure, and when force exceeded anchoring strength, roofs tore away from their walls. Curved roofs eliminated the pressure differential by providing no sharp transition between windward and leeward surfaces. Wind accelerated gradually across the smooth curve, creating minimal lift and almost no tendency to tear the structure upward. The barrel vault shape was essentially aerodynamic, offering so little wind resistance that even extreme storms couldn't generate enough force to cause structural failure. James Caldwell studied Lindqvist's undamaged roof with the humbled respect of a professional recognizing superior technique. The laminated ribs he'd dismissed as overbuilt had provided flexibility that absorbed wind vibration without cracking. The iron straps he'd criticized as wasteful had anchored the roof against forces that wooden pegs couldn't have resisted. The curved shape he'd mocked as circus architecture had proven invulnerable to conditions that destroyed every peaked roof in the valley. "I owe you an apology," Caldwell told Lindqvist as they surveyed the damage across the valley. "I said your roof would collapse under snow. Instead, it's the only roof in 20 miles that survived the wind. I've been building peaked roofs for 10 years because that's what I learned. But one storm proved I didn't understand Montana weather as well as I thought." Lindqvist accepted the acknowledgement without pride or vindication. "Peaked roofs work in calm places," he replied generously. "Good for shedding rain, easy to build, plenty strong for normal weather. But where wind blows hard, curves survive what angles cannot. Same lesson the Vikings learned, same lesson the sea teaches every shipwright. fight the wind and break, flow with the wind and survive. The storm's aftermath transformed Lindqvist from village eccentric to recognized authority. Families who had mocked his ridiculous boat roof now asked him to construct buildings that could survive conditions their standard construction couldn't withstand. The demand exceeded what one man could provide, so Lindqvist began teaching his techniques to anyone willing to learn. The teaching process revealed how much specialized knowledge curved roof construction required. Students had to learn timber selection, identifying trees with straight grain that would bend without splitting. They had to master the steam bending process, understanding how temperature, moisture, and timing affected the wood's flexibility. They had to develop an eye for curves, recognizing when a bent timber had achieved the correct arc and when it needed further adjustment. Most challenging was teaching the structural principles that made curved roofs strong. Students struggled to understand why a curved surface could support more weight than a flat one, why laminated beams outperformed solid timber, why iron straps were necessary where wooden pegs had always sufficed. Lindqvist found himself explaining physics concepts that his Swedish teachers had communicated through demonstration rather than theory. The curve is like a bridge, Lindqvist explained to his students, using an analogy that frontier settlers could understand. A flat bridge needs supports underneath, or it falls. An arched bridge supports itself through its shape. My roof is an arch turned sideways. The curve carries weight to the walls without needing posts in the middle. William Hensley became Lindqvist's first student, spending 4 months learning timber selection, steam bending, lamination techniques, and the geometric principles that made curved construction work. Hensley's notes from this apprenticeship, preserved in the Montana Historical Society, provide detailed documentation of Scandinavian barrel vault techniques adapted to American materials and conditions. By 1885, curved roof construction had become common practice for discerning builders throughout Montana Territory. The technique spread through networks of craftsmen who recognized its advantages after witnessing the contrasting performance during the Great Storm. Construction costs increased slightly due to the additional labor required for timber bending, but the elimination of wind damage and reduced snow maintenance more than offset the initial investment. The economic analysis proved compelling for ranchers and farmers operating on thin margins. A peaked roof required 2 to 3 days of snow-clearing labor during heavy winters, time that could otherwise be devoted to livestock care or equipment maintenance. Wind damage repairs averaged $150 per incident for peaked structures, a significant expense that curved roofs eliminated entirely. Over a building's expected 30-year lifespan, the curved roof's higher initial cost was recovered many times through reduced maintenance and damage. Insurance agents began recognizing the curved roof's advantages by 1888, when the Montana Territorial Insurance Cooperative started offering reduced premiums for barrel vault structures. The actuarial data was clear. Curved roofs filed fewer damage claims than peaked roofs in the same locations under identical weather conditions. The premium differential, approximately 15% lower for curved construction, provided additional financial incentive for builders considering the technique. Regional building surveys conducted in 1895 documented the technique's long-term performance. Of 34 peaked roofs constructed in Gallatin Valley during 1879, only 12 remained without major repair or reconstruction after the storms of the intervening years. Of 8 barrel vault roofs built during the same period, all 8 remained structurally sound, with most requiring no repairs whatsoever in 16 years of service. Lindqvist's original roof, the one Caldwell had predicted would collapse under snow, stood unchanged in 1923, when Lindqvist's grandson sold the property. The cabin had passed through 3 generations without a single shingle requiring replacement due to wind damage. Peaked structures built the same year had been repaired, rebuilt, or abandoned, but Lindqvist's barrel vault remained as solid as the day he'd completed it. 44 years of service in some of the harshest wind conditions in North America. Modern wind engineering research conducted by Montana State University in 1998 confirmed Lindqvist's empirical results through controlled testing. Researchers constructed scale models of peaked and barrel vault roofs, subjecting them to simulated wind loads in a wind tunnel facility. The testing documented that barrel vault structures experienced 73% less lift force than peaked equivalents at identical wind speeds, explaining why curved roofs survived conditions that destroyed standard construction. The ultimate vindication of Lindqvist's techniques came through safety statistics that demonstrated the life-saving value of traditional knowledge. The windstorm of 1880 injured 23 people and killed 2 when collapsing buildings trapped occupants. But curved roof construction, had it been widely adopted, could have prevented every structural failure because the technique's aerodynamic properties eliminated the vulnerability that caused peaked roofs to tear away. Lindqvist's ridiculous round roof hadn't just challenged American building assumptions. It had proven that dismissing traditional knowledge as foreign foolishness often revealed not their ignorance, but ours.